Good evening, good night. Welcome back. We're holding on page Pei Gimel in Shari Chedamuna, which is the gateway into oneness, unity, and faith. This unique segment, which we began by now quite a bit a while ago, good few months, holding Perik Zayin, the 7th chapter. We're holding on Ulefichoch, pretty much Ulefichoch, Kishem, which is 246, 7 lines from the top of the page. In the English text, you can see it on the corresponding, on the original text. You can see it on the corresponding English text. And as we mentioned time and again, for the newcomers, namely, that wherever you're watching this class, you can watch it. It's recommendable as well to watch it on the original website, which is Tanya Online, one word, tanyaonline.com. The advantage there, because it's set up in a way that, first of all, there's a separate scroll bar for the text. It's easy to follow as such. Also, you have complete access to all the previous classes in Shaykh Lemuna and in Elukoti Amorim, which we merited to conclude after quite some years. And as well, it comes up on the same, in the same exact manner. In other words, that wherever any class you'll open up, it'll come up in the same exact fashion, meaning to say you have the class and you have a separate scroll bar for the text. And again, as such, easy to follow. I say this also because, as we speak many times, that to come in to to get the flow, to get the idea of what we're up to and what we discussed last week, the past few weeks, on this very chapter, Zion, which is rather a larger chapter. And the Alter Rebbe brings home this message of Hashem Hu Elikim. Again, this idea, you can see it, there's a click away of the previous classes, Dalid, which Alter Rebbe introduces this whole idea of the two midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yet in the same HaKadosh Baruch Hu has these two midas, Hey and Vav and Zayin, so articulately brings home this message of Hashem Hu Elikim, that it's all two names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so on and so forth. So when we start a class, we feel maybe take some time and to get everybody in, especially the newcomers, to get them into the class and to see what's going on and where we're holding it, and then just not start out of nowhere. But that takes time, and we are limited with time one way or another, and we need to move on. So that's why I also mentioned it, that you on that original website, tanyaonline.com, you can see this past class, the previous classes, all the classes on this very chapter Zion, to get the flow, get the understanding of where the Alter Rebbe, to appreciate where the Alter Rebbe is going, even with today's learning, that is. So we'll try to get into it right away. Ulefichoch, and therefore, what's therefore? Because by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Alter Rebbe speaks about a little bit. We always have to. We never know the exact amount, how much, but a little bit, a little bit. To get into it. So the Alter Rebbe spoke we learned in the last class. Alter Rebbe speaks about how by HaKadosh Baruch Hu everything is Achdus Pashut, Beli Harkava, the difference of Achdus Pashut and Achdus Murkov. Achdus Murkov is different ideas coming together. It's not essentially one. It's you combine different matters together, they could appear to be one. We spoke about the idea of man, the human being, knowing something, a concept. We spoke of something so elemental as 2 plus 2 is 4. You know, at a very young age, if your cognitive faculties are in function, basic function, 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 plus 4 is 8. This is a concept. This concept in you, well, it feels like it was always part of me, but understandably it wasn't. Meaning to say, it feels like, that's kind of part of the hard drive of the human being. Not necessarily. Or no, you are a human being. Hashem gifted you with knowledge, and you take that knowledge, you take these faculties, intellectual faculties, and you grasp a concept. 2 plus 2 is 4. 3 times 4 is 12. It's a concept that you absorbed. Now, because you feel it's part and parcel of you, 2 plus 2 is 4, you feel it's part and parcel of you, but it's really not who you are. It's a combination. It looks like achdus, looks like there's a oneness there. You your faculties, your intellectual faculties, and the concepts that you perceive via your intellectual faculties, especially things which are pretty simple. And you feel that they're really one, they're achdus, they're one, but they're not achdus pashut. This is three separate ideas, completely distinct, that came together. Now they came together, they truly became echad. It's hard to differentiate the human being with his knowledge, and hard to differentiate the human being's knowledge with things that simple, like this example we just gave. So they become echad, but nonetheless it's echad hamurka, means it's a combination of a few ideas coming together. As opposed to when you speak about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's achdus pashut, meaning to say it's not a few things coming together. What's coming exactly together? Hashem knows everything. He knows what's going on in this room that we're learning. There's a table, and there's a chair, and there's a human being. He knows all that. Wow! So now he knows it because ain't davar nela mimeka. There's nothing else nothing you can hide from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he knows everything. So when you say he knows everything, he says he, and then his knowledge, and then he knows via his knowledge, he knows what's going on in this room, and he knows everything in detail. There's nothing which you can say is just hiding under somewhere. He knows everything in detail. Granted, he's God, but one would perhaps suggest that okay, he has these magnified. This magnified knowledge, or this knowledge which supersedes any knowledge attributed to the human being because he's Hashem, and he's able to know everything, which means there's nothing. Ain't davar nela mimeka. Man, even this which he knows, doesn't really know it thoroughly. There's always the underlying layer, which he takes some time to figure it out, and then you have to figure out deeper. Everything has its depth, its breadth. The man proceeds in his lifetime, progresses. That is, in his lifetime, to know things, the same ideas, deeper and broader, and so on and so forth. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows everything in an instant, because that's the point. Ein davar nela. There's not one detail Hashem has to learn about later. Oh, I see it, but there's more to it. No, you know everything. The one would suggest that it's the same idea. There are three things coming together. There's Hashem, His knowledge, and this is what He knows. No. By HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's achdus pashut, because this which He knows is also part of Him. What is it, independent of Him? Where is the energy? What's infusing energy? What's imbuing energy in this table that it should be able to just simply exist? As we said, nothing can exist without the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And every moment Hashem has to pump energy into every creation, including this table. It's not just like something that was created 6,000 years ago, the wood, and which created this table. I don't know if that tree stood, probably not, but just the concept that something was there, created by God, but just is there because it's there. No, we learned in the beginning, the Shayach B'Amunah, something very fundamental, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu continues to vitalize creation. So when you look at a table, where is the table coming from exactly? Where is its life? Where is its energy? How does it exist? Answer, because Hashem is imbuing His energy every single second. Oh, so Hashem is imbuing His energy, so what does it mean? He knows that. That energy is Him. And the same way when you talk about Hashem's knowledge, it's all part of Him. So that oneness is not a oneness which is combined of a few factors together. It's all one, essentially one. It's all part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So again, we're just doing this in brief. You could see the last week's class, namely last week's class. Again, click away in that same website. So we go on to Lufichach, and therefore, just like it's impossible. Then He created being to perceive the muhus. Muhus is mao, the what is of creator. We can never make out creator because we're part of creation. We can never make out the atzmusi, the core of creator. Impossible. So kachi efshel haskim daite. In the exact same fashion, it's impossible to perceive and appreciate the mahus, the mahu, the what is Hashem's das, Hashem's knowledge, because His knowledge is Him. If you would say His knowledge is a step lower than Him, there is Him, the way He's transcendent God, but that faculty of knowledge is kind of at a lower level, so maybe we can appreciate Hashem's knowledge. Him, I agree. Can't understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but His knowledge? Yeah, maybe I can. Can figure something out. Not all of it, but a bit of it. No, it's impossible, because His knowledge is not a separate part of Him. as we just said, it's Achdus Pashut. His knowledge is Him. So if you can't understand, we can't understand, and understandably so. Why we can't understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu? He's the Creator. And how could you expect creation, limited, finite, created beings, understand an infinite, limitless Creator? Can't, understandably so. So too, you can't understand Hashem's das, Hashem's knowledge, because His knowledge is Him. It's about the belief with faith that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is higher, transcendent than seichel and intellect and hasaga and perception. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is totally one. His oneness is all-encompassing. And His knowledge and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu rather, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Yachid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Vidaite, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's knowledge, rather read, HaKal Echad Mamash, it's all essentially one. Knowing Himself is where He recognizes He knows everything in the above and in the below, in the superior and in the inferior. Ad shilshul kotten shabiyam, the small water bug, we spoke about this last week. Again, a little bit more elaborative, per certain perspective and point of view of this very statement. A little bit more elaborative. You could see it again in last week's class. So, to the small water bug in the Mediterranean, as an example. Vaditush koton, like a small. Many times yitush is translated as a mosquito. But it's to be exact, it's a bit different bug, but it's a very small, tiny bug. Sheyeh b'tabar haaretz would be in the center of the land, just like the tabor by a person, which is the area of where the natal cord is the center of the person. The expression is tabor haaretz, the center of the land. There would be a tiny bug. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows Himself, so He knows that. He doesn't have to go out of Himself and say, "What's going on there?" Just in the middle of the stormy waters of the Mediterranean, there's a tiny bug there. But I'm God. I have dynamic eyes. I'm able to go straight to that and find that. That you going to find that? What is that? That is part of you. That doesn't have any independent existence. It's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Hashem is not going to find that. He knows Himself, so He knows that. So when He knows Himself, it's from, again, a certain perspective and point of view, He knows everything about Himself. So the knowledge of that is similar to knowing every part of Himself, means elyonim v'tachteinim, equally from a certain perspective and point of view, because it's all about HaKadosh Baruch Hu Himself. Like we gave the other day example. So you're sitting in one room, for whatever it is, there's a perforation for whatever reason, there's a perforation in the wall, and your toe is sticking, your foot is sticking out, and as such your toe is sticking out. In the other room, you don't see it, you don't see your toe, you don't see anything which is happening around your toe, and someone takes a needle and pricks your toe, you're jumping. But you didn't see anything, nor you see even your foot, certainly not your toe. It's covered with a sock, as an example. You don't see what's happening in the other room. You don't see anybody came by. You didn't even know anybody came by. But you're jumping. And no one's going to say, well, that's only your toe. It's so distant from you. And particularly now, from your, conscious mind, particularly now, it's like it's in another domain. No, it doesn't. That's not, it will not unfold like that. Because it's another domain, therefore, I won't jump equally as if I saw it and I saw someone doing it. Because this is part of who I am. This is me. And so too, when we talk about elyonim and tachteinim, when we talk about those tachteinim and this which exists in the inferior worlds, in Eilam Hazat Tachtin, or in the smallest detail, so distant from humanity and so distant from any far-fetched reach of humanity, that little water bug in the center of the Mediterranean. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows exactly that, like He knows everything else, the angelic or the celestial worlds, His angels and in His shamas and Gan Eden and so on and so forth, because all that ultimately is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is also part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He knows Himself, so He knows that. You can't say, oh, that's so small and that's so distant. There is no such a thing. Because whatever is distant, those waters, the stormy waters, where is their existence coming from? How do they exist, rather? How do they exist? What is their existence? Their existence is the Dvar Hashem Mahava Machai Mekaimesim, is the godly energy which is right now vitalizing them, the godly energy which is giving them sustenance, life, existence rather, life and existence right now. That's coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that is ultimately part of the dynamic of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's not like, oh, he's looking all the way there in places where no one ever, human being ever passed. And a little water bug, but he has dynamic eyes, and he's able to see all the way there. There's no there and here. Hakoil achdus pashut. It's all the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He knows himself. He knows that. The idea of this example which we gave, Alter Rebbe has it similarly in Perek Mem Beis Likutei Amarim. He adds a few things that a person is spoiled. He's impacted by that, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not, which is an important and crucial point over here. The Alter Rebbe doesn't bring it out over here. It's relevant in Perek Mem Beis. It's worthwhile. Perek Mem Beis Likutei Amarim. It's also a lengthier chapter. If you find that, again, in the multiple classes, you can click. Also easy to find on this original website. It's important. We explained then why was it important that the differentiation between how man is impacted by everything which transpires by him, with him, as opposed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and why does that contribute to the notion of oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Not for now. I mean, again, it's easy to access. It's worthwhile to see what its relevance is in this context of oneness. But here the Alter Rebbe doesn't emphasize it, but we can appreciate it. Again, we're dealing with something, not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's looking out to something else which would establish this achdus being an achdus murkov, a combination of different factors coming together. But no, it's achdus pashut, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Ein davar nela mimenu. There's nothing which is concealed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not that he's able to see that, I'm God, don't try to hide that from me. No, everything which transpires is me. And if it is me, obviously, ein davar nela mimeko. Yeah, I don't see it, so I'm not so much impacted. No, when someone's pricking your toe, you're jumping equally, because that is you. It's not a far out detail, which it's not part of your consciousness or interest, which would say, oh, now Hashem is looking there, he's not looking there. It's all part of him. So understandably, the knowledge of everything that goes on is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore, ein davar nela mimeko. Consequently, we can appreciate that ein davar nela mimeko. It can't, by definition, exist a matter that is concealed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Beyond to say the vision of man, well, I think I see everything. 20/20 image. I see everything. I see that detail and that detail. You can't see it. I can see it. I have clear eyes. It's much beyond that. It's not he is seeing that, connecting with that. That is him. And therefore, the ein davar nela mimeko takes a total different. Nothing can be concealed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It takes a different. It's a different approach. Total different approach to that. Understandably so. When we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows something, it's not that it adds, it's an addition to this which HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew a moment before, or 2 moments before, and this is something which was added to that knowledge. This knowledge does not add any multiplicity and combination at all, meaning to say that it's not when I know something, there's something yesterday I didn't know, today I know it, but there's still stuff I don't know, and I will learn it as Hashem tomorrow, and the day after. So there you have the multiplicity, meaning to say, I knew this, now it became kind of part of me, but not achdus pashut, it's achdus murkov, because it's different things coming together. It might feel like one now, but that oneness is not an absolute oneness. It's a combination of a few things coming together, as we explained, but there's a limit. Tomorrow I will know more, so it's an addition, hisafa. It's something which is added to my knowledge. The next day, even more. So there you have the idea of the many coming together. You have the idea of a hisafa, an increase by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By definition, you can't say this knowledge is about an additional added piece of knowledge, or a combination of this piece of information and that piece of information doesn't exist by because in the end of the day it's about knowing himself and knowing his core, and Yidiyas Atzmei v'atzmusei, rather Yidiyas Atzmei, knowing himself, v'atzmusei v'daitei hakol echad. The Eibishter's core and the Eibishter's knowledge are truly one. The Rebbe continues, because it's so difficult to image that, to perceive that, to paint that, to illustrate that in our intellect, because we look at matters the way we function, the human being functions. Yeah, I know I could understand that God functions differently, understandably that I don't believe that God functions like me. But still, what is my maximum perception of any matter is the way I'm used to this, is the way I'm accustomed to the way I function or the human being functions. Therefore, we perceive everything based on human nature, based on the way the human being functions. To have accurate appreciation on the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu functions, the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows in this context of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perception, it's not that I believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu functions like me, but I can have accurate understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's knowledge based because I appreciate things the way the human being functions. And again, I could understand it somewhat conceptually. I could understand and appreciate what Alter Rebbe is saying. But to have clarity on that, to approach Hashem in that fashion, it's difficult. Litzayer, in other words, to appreciate, to identify it, to illustrate it with accuracy in our mind. Very difficult. To understand the concept, hu v'daitei echad. So again, intellectually, conceptually, sure I understand it. This explanation is so rich, and this explanation is so telling, and it makes so much sense, and it resonates. The Eibush doesn't know that. What's the Hashem and what's that? No, that is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it makes sense. But to have litziur means that completely to illustrate that approach, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Das works, the way that Hashem's knows, it's difficult. And Alter Rebbe even adds ma'id, it's very difficult. Therefore the Navi said, the prophet says, Ki govu shamayim me'oretz, ki govu derechai midarchichem. Like heaven is exalted from earth, heaven is elevated from earth, Cain in the same fashion, govu derechai midarchichem. My way, says Hashem, is so separated, it's so exalted from your ways. What are you going to compare your ways and your imagination and your conduct or the way you think your ways are, that's the way my ways ought to be? No, it's by definition a different type of derech, because you're talking about from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the infinite HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How can we compare drachichem to drachoi? Says the Navi, representing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Govu drachai, giving over the message of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki govu drachai midachichem, ma'machshavei, my thoughts from your thoughts. You understand something one way, you think something through in one way, but my machshavei is totally different and totally separate. No, see another pasuk. The Navi says, do you think you'll understand, you'll find the process of intellectuality the way it's attributed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Cheker melashon, intellect, understanding, appreciation. And again, this is with a question mark. Cheker lekati motzei, v'gaymer, etc. As the pasuk continues, another pasuk, another verse says, "Uksiv ha'einei basar loch." The Navi says, referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are your eyes like the eyes of flesh and blood, of a human being of flesh and blood? Or any other creation of basar, of flesh? No. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, never to think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees like we do. And the same thing, your vision is similar to the vision of the human being? Obviously not. The Navi says, man sees, on the onset it's just different. On the onset it's different and distinct, because man sees and knows all this which man sees and perceives is this which is out of his system. and then he absorbs something from there inwards. You're seeing something. You're looking at something. So that whole image you didn't see a moment ago, because you weren't looking there a moment ago, so you took that and you processed it. You absorbed it. So it was there and you're bringing it in to your system. So to knowledge, 2 plus 2 is 4, was there before you were ever created, before your grandfather was created. It was there from the beginning of time. It's not part of who you are. It was there before you were around, this concept, or many other concepts. You learned about it, you took it from there and you brought it in, you processed it into your system. By HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's the stark, diametrically opposite expression. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't take that and absorb it inwards. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that. If it's the knowledge, if it's the appearance, or rather it's the this which HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees, he doesn't see with the riyah shechutz mimenu, or of a scenario rather, chutz mimenu. The scenario is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so to the knowledge is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Could we think of something so starkly different about the vision and appreciation of man, l'havdil with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That's what the Navi says. Ha'ini basar loch. Im kireis enish titter, is your vision like our vision, like of the vision of the human being. Man sees everything, knows everything with a knowledge which is out of his system. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows everything by knowing himself. End quote of the Ad Kan L'Shaynei. This is a quote from, or this is probably the Rambam himself. This is the Rambam himself. Ayin Sham Bilchus Yisei Atayda. Look there in the halachas of Yisei Atayda, which is again the first part of the Rambam, the Mishnah Torah, the magnum opus of the Rambam. V'yiskimei mechachmei Kabbalah, and the wise of Kabbalah, the Mekubalim, agreed with the Rambam, Kimavur bePardes Miharamak Zal, like it's explained in the Pardes, which is a compilation of the famous Mekubal, the Ramak, Reb Moshe Mikordova, Zichreinu L'Varacha. I always get confused from the different Mekubalim which are quoted in Chassidus. In any case, so his compilation is in Pardes. It was the Pardes. So he elaborates there and he explains there, quoting the Rambam and identifying with the Rambam's illustration, identifying with the Rambam's explanation and thesis and presentation about Yediyas Hashem. The Rebbe continues, the next part of this Perek Zayin, which is again, we say this next part because it's very rare, as we know, the Alter Rebbe to divide any Perek. Most of the significant majority of chapters in Likutei Amarim and in Sharich V'Amunah and Igeres HaTshuva, Igeres HaKodesh as well, are not divided. Every chapter, the significant majority of the chapters are not divided, and it's explained what Alter Rebbe did divide is with precision. Likutei Amarim, for example, there are 4 places that Alter Rebbe divides the chapter. We spoke about it then in our minimal understanding and appreciation why would Alter Rebbe would divide that chapter, but again, 4 out of 53. And so too over here, it's rare, so it's explained the reason why the Alter Rebbe would divide this, even though it's not as indicative, this or is not as explanatory as much as the way it's pretty obvious there in Likutei Amarim, or if not that obvious, but again it's easier to understand the divide because it's like something, an additional idea in the same framework of that very chapter. There's something additional that Alter Rebbe adds as such, and again in those 4 places, and as such we can appreciate Alter Rebbe's dividing the chapter. Here, at least I can't yet understand, other than it's a lengthier chapter, and Alter Rebbe definitely goes on to something kind of not totally new, but he says mikan, he goes into the whole idea of tzimtzum kipshute. So maybe that's the reason of the divide, because we know that there was always that argument between Gdeli and Chachmei Yisrael. The tzimtzum was kipshute. What does that mean? And again, maybe that's perhaps because Al Rebbe goes into kind of this new sugya, or this famous sugya, the famous discussion if the tzimtzum was kipshute or not. Now, tzimtzum kipshute means there was a contraction of the Hashem's infinite light. This is what we're learning about, starting from Perek Dalet. The whole expression of Gvura of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is about contraction, contracting the great Ayr of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It should not be revealed and manifest the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu is for himself, by himself, which is again infinite. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is himself, again, Chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is an expression of Hashem's infinity, the Shem Havaya, and everything, it's impossible, anything finite in the face of infinity. Because Lashon Al Tereh time and again, everything would bottle b'mitzias, understandably so, nothing of finitude could exist at all, for that matter, in the face of infinity. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with this Gvura, condensed that Eira B'Ligvul, known also, brought by the Arizal, and Al Tereh quotes the Eitzeres Chaim, in Eitzeres Chaim, the idea of the tzimtzum of the original tzimtzum harishen, which would be again discussed by the Mekubalim, which is that devoid, so to say, the space of the devoid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light, again dictated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and even there we understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there. It's just about the Gili Eir, the revelation, the manifestation, which would not allow anything of finite to exist. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyochel, we gave the example that a teacher, when he has to teach a pupil, or something is new to the study, we spoke about always any intellectual concept, but we stuck to the idea of Torah, for example. You have a Talmud Chacham, this great goyin, this great gigantic goyin in Torah, something a knowledgeable Talmud Chacham, a prodigy in Torah, and he has to go ahead and teach a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, or someone who's new to the Torah. And he has to teach him, obviously he has to condense. He can't just divulge everything he knows, which is default by him. And just the regular, when he opens the Gemara and he just says it like you understand table, chair, and anything else which comes to easy to perceive and understand and appreciate. To him, the entire Torah is that way. So he would open up in a Gemara and he would say it in Gemara Rashi Tesis Rishonim Achreinim and the Poskim and so on. That's just regular by him. That's just his respiration. Chayenu ve'erech yameinu. In other words, it's so part and parcel of him, as an example, because he knows everything. And then he's told, go ahead and teach someone new to Torah all this information. So he's going to open the Gemara and start saying everything he knows, even with precision and detail, not just quickly rattling off the Gemara, but literally saying it in detail. But again, with his rich knowledge in every piece of Gemara and Rashi and Taisus, as we just mentioned, the other party won't begin to understand anything. So what is he, and especially it's a child in age, so what does he do? He has to condense and contract that flow of knowledge, and then kind of make it kind of devoid space within himself and start from scratch to teaspoon this pupil which is sitting in front of him. So there has to be contraction in order that there should be a minimal trickle of light in this context of knowledge, in order that the recipient should not get lost. So there is contraction, but it's only contraction is something which he establishes, but not that the Talmud Chacham now became the storyteller, as we gave an example. Many times he conveys it with a metaphor and a story, just in his process of teaspooning this information to this pupil. In his mind, every word what he says is already imbued with all that knowledge that he had and continues to have even as he's teaching. But the recipient doesn't receive it that way. And that's why they're able to start absorbing the knowledge, to know and to grow. And as we mentioned, it takes a while to start appreciating the knowledge. And eventually the master who's teaching was conveying that knowledge, to start thinking like him and so on, not to go into it now. But there has to be the contraction of the whole flow of energy in order that it should be the recipient should be able to. This should stand a chance that this recipient should be able to absorb anything. So understandably, in the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in infinity, and nothing can exist. Nothing of finite can exist. So are there worlds, even the superior worlds? It's all part of the finite expression of finitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even Gan Eden Elyon, it's a world is Gan Elyon. This doesn't exist when you're talking about the Ein Sof, the infinite energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu contracted his great Eir. Again, you could draw the thread from the message of Gevura, even though Hashem Hu Echad Shmei Echad, meaning to say it's all names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so it's the same HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but from the beginning of Dalet, Alter Rebbe starts introducing this idea of Gevura, which is again directly connected to this idea of tzimtzum, contraction, opposite of just the expression, manifestation, the flow of energy, no, the contraction of that very energy. And that's the point of the Gevura, which is synonymous with this message. Tzimtzum, the Eibishter was mitzamtzum, eirei habilti balgvul, alatzad, in order to establish a devoid, in order to start trickling in the light. Understandably, when the teacher contracts his great knowledge to sit in front of the student and not say anything, not utter anything, obviously the student understandably won't perceive anything as well. Just like you have to contract your great knowledge for the pupil to start, to give the pupil a chance to connect with you, but you can't stop there. At that point, you have to start trickling in that knowledge, as we use the terminology. We use the expression of teaspooning the child, teaspooning the pupil. You have to start doing that. So too, as explained in brief, we're saying it over here. The Arizal explained there was another Mekuvam, the Tzimtzum Harishin. It was a place of the void, a contraction of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then came the Kav, which trickles in. The Kav itself is connected to the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's a Kav Kotan B'Kotzar. It comes in and it starts creating this world and that world, or many different expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu prior to creating Eilam, but nonetheless expressions, so they're post-Tzimtzum. And then eventually Atzilus is created, emanated from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then Bria and Yitzira, and the rock bottom is Eilam Asiyah, She'ein Tachton Mata Himeno, which is nothing lower than Eilam Asiyah, but all coming from that Kav Kotzar, which allows Eilamis to exist. So this is the phenomena of the Tzimtzum. So there's those, even Talmid Chachamim, they said if the Eibishter contracted, if the Eibishter contracted his great light, so it kind of remains so. Yeah, Hashem knows everything because He is that Kav Kotzar. He is that trickle of light which it penetrates and emanates and creates a lot of stuff happening within that chalal, in that place which is devoid of the Ein Sof. And he's saying even the stuff which we are familiar with, Gan Eden, Gan Eden Elyon, and beyond that Eilam Atzilus, which is beyond Gan Eden. It's an infinite, the world which houses the Ein Sof. Yet a world it is. So a lot happening in that. Similar to this example which we're giving, a lot happening once the master starts divulging, trickle of light from his knowledge, conveying that to the pupil. A lot of stuff happening because it's day after day after day after day, and the Gemara says it takes 40 years. And that's 40 years of hashpah, 40 years of relating this information to the Talmud, that the Talmud could finally understand and appreciate the knowledge of the master. So there's a constant flow of energy, but the energy is commensurate to the recipient, to the pupil. And so too, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, following the Tzimtzum, there's a lot of there's the Kav, which is a trickle of light, but nonetheless a light coming from the Ein Sof, which creates everything. So granted, Hashem is not only aware, but Hashem is in control of every single detail, because it's His light coming through. But to say that in this Tzimtzum you have the whole Ein Sof, the way it was pre-Tzimtzum, there was those, even Gdei Yisrael, which felt, no, the Tzimtzum is Kipshute. Hashem established this Tzimtzum. So at that point, the rules change. There is Him beyond the Tzimtzum, and then post the Tzimtzum. So beyond the tzimtzum, connecting to post-tzimtzum, is something that he has to tune into. Once he has to tune into, is he limited how much he's able to tune into? Obviously not. He's God. So he knows everything and he's in control of everything, but that's not the core him. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, based on everything we learned now, the phenomenon of tzimtzum kipshutei is totally negated. We can appreciate, even as we just touch upon this in brief, but as the Alter Rebbe is going to go on and explain, that in the onset, the Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't work the way man works. And again, similar to this example, which we can understand, when the master is teaspooning the child, the pupil, meaning he would say not necessarily a child in age, someone new to this Torah, for one moment did he lose his status as a prodigy, as a Talmud Chacham, as a Goin? Not even a moment. When he's teaspooning the child, the whole flow of information is right there. For that matter, it's in the example itself. When he's giving a metaphor, he already has that message in the words of the metaphor. So it's a simultaneous expression. Yes, contraction, but I'm all there. Everything about me there. Where did the knowledge of the Talmud Chacham go? Didn't go anywhere. It's there, but at this moment he decided to contract it just for the sake of teaspooning the child, teaspooning the pupil, because if not, it'll completely get lost. But the knowledge is always there and always present. And so too, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mitzamtzim, certainly because not only we would get lost, we wouldn't be able to exist, because anything finite cannot exist in the face of the infinite. Understandably so, but once HaKadosh Baruch Hu did it, did he really remove? Did the rules really change? Obviously not. He is in the place of tzimtzum. So with this, Alter Rebbe says, with this we can understand. Alter Rebbe says shigagas. It's inadvertent. The fact that they adapted this way of thinking. It wasn't deliberate, because from a certain perspective, the Alter Rebbe writes, Hashem yichaper badom, means, like, we better say it's inadvertent, because if you think about it in its core understanding of this matter, way based on the Alter Rebbe explained before, and the Alter Rebbe would go on and explaining, we could see that it's absurd to think in that fashion. So Alter Rebbe right away say, they didn't do this, they didn't think in that way, dafka that way. It was inadvertent, but the Alter Rebbe says Hashem yichaper b'adam. Hashem should forgive them, because if you think about it on its core level of appreciation of this which the Alter Rebbe conveys over here, that the whole idea of equating the phenomenon of tzimtzum, the way it is by the human being, or the way the human being appreciates and perceives tzimtzum to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is absurd. And even with the explanation we explained till now, it's all about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You say Hashem knows that. What is the that? What is the that? What is giving it energy right now? Nothing is independent other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving it its energy right now. He's creating it right now. If he pulls his energy out of that created being, it would cease to exist, completely disappear. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that. So what do you mean he knows that? And he looks from the area of pre-tzimtzum into post-tzimtzum? Everything is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if you think about it, again, based on this explanation, you can appreciate why the Alter Rebbe uses this term, Hashem yichaper b'adam. And obviously it's a shgago. And again, the different questions they had, how could it be tzimtzum shlei kipshutei, that it's not real tzimtzum? They had different of their observations, but the whole thing fundamentally, it doesn't make sense based on this understanding of this presentation which the Alter Rebbe presents over here and explains in the following piece, which, just gave a little bit of a preview of Bez Hashem of this Mikan Yesh Lahavin. We will pick up on this coming week, the Ezras Hashem Yisbarich. And in other words, we'll follow with the text and we'll pick up and we'll move along, which again, for us to appreciate what the Alter Rebbe is getting at when he speaks about the based on what he said now, based on what he explained up till now, which we can get the feeling, the sensation of what the Alter Rebbe is going to present over here in this following piece. We'll stop over here though. But as we just mentioned, even based on what the Alter Rebbe explained in the previous part, for that matter, the Alter Rebbe, again, we can understand why the whole idea of Tzimtzum Kipshute is something which is essentially negated. Alter Rebbe even begins, Mikan. Mikan means to say based on everything that I explained over here, which we will look forward learning B'ez Hashem, as we just mentioned, in the coming week. Kabbalah Leinu L'Teva. Have a good week.